Damian Lewis got off the boat at the port of the city where he had been born 50 years ago, and to which he had not returned for 20 years. He walked along the seafront, surprised by how much his hometown had changed, and also by how much of it he could still recognize. There were lots of new buildings up on the hills around the city now, buildings which he didn't recognize. Yet many of the old buildings along the sea were exactly the same as he remembered them, although many of the old shops he remembered were there no more. He walked away from the port and into the center of the city. He walked up the main road and saw how all the shops had changed, but there was still one small cafe there which was the same as when he was young and famous. He walked into the cafe and sat down at one of the tables. He recognized the owner of the cafe behind the bar and the waiter who was working there. They both looked much, much older. Damien felt that he didn't look as old as they did, even though they were all 20 years older now. Damien sat at his table and waited for the waiter to come to him. He sat there for 10, 15, 20 minutes. Half an hour passed. The waiter continued to ignore him. Damien raised his arm and shouted to the waiter, then to the owner of the cafe behind the bar, but it was useless. They didn't come and ask him what he wanted. They were ignoring him. Angry, Damien got up and walked out of the cafe, slamming the door behind him. Such ignorant people, he thought. Now I remember why I left this town 20 years ago and never came. He walked along the main street as far as the main square in the town. When he arrived at the main square, he remembered the other reason why he had never come back. In the main square of the town there was the theater. As he looked at the theater, Damian Lewis had a terrible memory of what had happened there 20 years ago. 20 years ago, Damian Lewis was the most famous singer in the world. He had sung in all the most famous opera houses in the world. He had sung in London, New York, Moscow, Buenos Aires, Tokyo, and Sydney. Everywhere he went, people paid large sums of money for tickets, and when they saw him sing they clapped, applauded, and cheered for hours. When he was at the height of his fame, Damian Lewis decided to come back to his hometown and sing at a triumphant concert in the theater at the main square of the town. The concert was announced and all the tickets sold out within a few hours. The evening of the concert, thousands of people crowded into the theater to see the legendary Damian Lewis sing in the theater of his hometown. There was silence as Damian walked onto the stage. Then he began to sing one of his best-known songs. And at the end of the song, there was just silence. Nobody clapped, nobody applauded, nobody cheered. Damian waited, very surprised for a moment, then started to sing another song. At the end of this song, there was silence for a moment. The people began to boo and to hiss. Damian tried to cover the noise of the booing and hissing by singing another song, very loudly this time. But it got worse. The louder he sang, the louder the boos and hisses became. Then someone threw a tomato at him. Then someone else threw a rotten orange at him. Then someone else threw an old shoe at him. Soon, there was a rain of rotten fruit, vegetables, and smelly old shoes falling down on the great Damian Lewis. Damian was angry. Damien was furious. He stormed off the stage and out of the theater. He left his hometown that night, and he said that he would never, ever go back there ever again. But 20 years later, Damian Lewis changed his mind. He was getting old now, he thought. He wanted to go back home again, to see the town where he had grown up. But in the cafe he realized that perhaps not much had really changed. He decided to walk into the theater. As he walked in, he saw the man selling tickets in the box office. It was the same man from 20 years ago. Damien said hello to him, but the man said nothing and ignored him. Still the same, thought Damien. He walked into the theater and got up onto the empty stage. He thought he could hear the terrible booing and hissing of that night 20 years ago. He felt sad and left the theater and decided to go and visit the house where he had been born 50 years ago. He walked across the town, expecting to be recognized by people. When he got close to his old house, he walked through the park where he had played as a small child. He saw some men there, same age as he was, and thought he remembered them. They were people who had been his friends when he was at school. He walked over to them to say hello, but they too ignored him. He walked past the old shops near his house. They hadn't changed. There were still the same people there, all of whom ignored him. He was so angry and disappointed now that he began to shout as he walked along the streets.
I am the great Damian Lewis, the greatest singer the world has ever heard.
Nobody took any notice of him, he continued.
Don't you know me? Don't you recognize me?
Nobody took any notice. When he finally reached his old house, he at least had a pleasant surprise. Outside the house, there was a statue, and it was a statue of himself. Finally, thought Damien, somebody has recognized my genius. They put up a statue of me, and they never even told me. Damien went to have a closer look at the statue. There was some writing at the bottom of the statue. Damian Lewis, it said, singer. Damien was disappointed that it said only singer and not the greatest singer in the world, but at least it was a statue. There was some more writing. He looked carefully at it. There was his date of birth, 50 years ago. And then there was something else. It was the date of his death, and the date was yesterday. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, subscribe for more videos, press the bell icon and select all to get notifications.